In the early 1970s in Murphysboro, Illinois, the town was terrorized by a creature that was thought to come out of a local river called the Big Muddy. This river gave rise to the creature's name, the Big Muddy Monster. But the sightings go back much further than the 1970s. In 1942, there was a flap about a creature terrorizing the region that was so startling to the community that newspapers warned children not to go into the woods by themselves. Livestock was found ripped apart and devoured by a creature that locals referred to as the Thing. The 50s continued with sightings, as workers at the Murphysboro Iron and Metal Company had multiple reports of a creature that frequented the area. In 1968, another creature was reported, this one over 10 foot tall, that was referred to as the What's It. But it was in the 1970s that the area was a hotbed of paranormal activity, consisting of curious sight-seekers, amateur monster hunters, and cryptozoologists. Then, during the summer of 1988, an incident occurred at a local salvage yard that resulted in yet another flurry of reports. Although the sightings tapered off, stories of the creature continue to this day. This is an investigative look into the legend of the Big Muddy Monster. Usually the first thing that comes to mind when discussing Bigfoot is the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest and surrounding areas. With its mountain ranges and deep, thick forests, the northwestern portions of the United States would seem to be a logical location for an undiscovered primate, if one truly exists. However, the legendary creature is reported to have been sighted by thousands of eyewitnesses across much of the country, and especially in the Midwest. The southern Illinois landscape is rich in its biodiversity, with its old-growth forests, cedar swamps, soaring bluffs that seem to rise up out of the landscape around every corner, and deep hollers, making it prime habitat for a cryptid legend. It should come as no surprise that folklore of a Bigfoot-like creature exists here, and Murphysboro found itself smack dab in the middle of the 1970s flap that was captivating the nation at that time.
I would describe Murphysboro as a place that has great pride in itself and in its traditions and in its stories. I think it's a place that doesn't mind to talk itself up, and it doesn't mind people inside the community saying disparaging things even about the community, but people from outside the community better not say anything bad about us because we certainly take offense to that. Yeah, the residents of Murphysboro are a loyal set of folks. If you put forth an honest effort, they will appreciate it. I was born in DuQuoin and grew up in Carbondale, only came to Murphysboro in 2005, and this community has embraced me wholeheartedly. Murphysboro is a skeptical group. They don't necessarily buy everybody that's coming into town with a new product to sell or a get-rich-quick type of thing. They are a group that is questioning. And so you better have your facts together if you're going to try to sell them something. And so I've learned that as mayor also. Well, you hear about the big muddy monster. I grew up in Southern Illinois from the time I was a child. You know, my family, particularly my father, did a lot of hunting, squirrel hunting, duck hunting, goose hunting. I still do a lot of that to this day. And so there would be wisecracks made when you're in the woods turkey hunting, you hear a stick break or something, and you say, well, maybe that's the big muddy monster. You maybe see a unusual impression in the ground when you're out in the woods somewhere, and somebody says, well, maybe it's the big muddy monster. So these types of things weave themselves into the conversations that people have probably on a daily basis.
Aside from the original investigators into the flap of the 70s, possibly no others are as knowledgeable of the Big Muddy legend as authors Chad Lewis, Nova Voss, and Kevin Lee Nelson, who in 2019 co-published a book documenting the many incidents surrounding the mystery. Lewis and Nelson agreed to return to the area for the making of this documentary. One of the first experts on the list was Michael Huntington, an author and researcher on the many phenomena in the area. Huntington searches for some of the most bizarre tales and anomalous activity, and the Big Muddy Monster certainly fits the bill.
Michael, you've been researching this area as an author and a lecturer on topics of the weird for a very long time. What do you remember about the Big Muddy legend?
Well, here in Southern Illinois, I'm actually located in Missouri, just on the other side of the river, but you know, the lore does permeate all throughout the river region, and Murphysboro is known for its mud monster, and he's called Big Muddy by the people in the area, or the Big Muddy Monster, or Mongo. You know, there's a couple of different names that he goes by, but it all came from a number of encounters that occurred in 1973 through 1975, as well as some cases in the late 80s. People in the Murphysboro area, which is located on the banks of the Big Muddy River, reported seeing a 8-foot tall, 350-pound creature of some sort, some sort of ape-like creature that was white with sort of a shaggy dog hair that was matted and muddy. A number of sightings occurred to the point where the police took interest. Hunters came from throughout the region to look for the monster. Nothing was really found other than some reports from people seeing and hearing the alleged creature, and some tracks.
Despite the absence of any mainstream media or even local awareness, strange sightings of the elusive cryptid did not end in the 70s, and reports continue up to this day. Claims include roadside crossings, activity around homesteads, and even encounters with juveniles. Most reports come from area residents, not Bigfoot hunters, lending some credence to the accounts.
People do come out here and experience strange sounds. They listen to the muddy waters and they wonder, you know, could the mud monster be back? And maybe he will come back one day. Who knows?
It almost seems to be a source of pride within the community now, you know, where it's their local legend and it's theirs that they own themselves.
Yeah, all of the local newspapers have reported on it, local news stations. It's the mud monster's been featured in several documentary television shows and documentary films. So, you know, he's definitely embraced by the region. And I think most people that have lived here a while, these towns, the big towns around here tend to be college towns. So, you know, the people come and go, but those people that live in the area for a good long while are very familiar with the lore of the mud monster.
In truth, there are more people who believe the idea of an undiscovered giant primate to be incredulous versus those who even entertain the idea of the possibility the species actually exists. Even more rare are those who claim to have had direct encounters and are willing to come forward with their claims. Christian Burrill had an intense moment in his childhood that left an imprint of fear for the rest of his life. His brief but terrifying brush with the unknown was substantiated by other eyewitnesses, including the Murphysboro Police Department.
So Christian, we're in the backyard. This is where the incident took place. Take us back there.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been back here. I'm 50 years old now. Back in 1973, the summer of 1973, I was living in this house with my mother and father and my little sister. My little sister would have been about a year old. And it was a warm summer night, and there were fireflies out. And so I was in the backyard. We had a little sandbox back there. And my parents were in the kitchen. They could see out the back window. I was probably about 50, 75 yards away from them. I can remember all the lights being on in the house. And it wasn't dark completely, but it was getting dark. Like in another 20 minutes, it'd be dark. I was out there chasing fireflies with my friend Jack from next door. He's probably about 4 or 5. And Jack had to go home. So Jack went off to his house next door. And I was still out there chasing fireflies. And I do not remember seeing the whatever it was. I mean, I do not know what it was. I don't have a memory of seeing it, but I have a very strong memory of being afraid and spinning around on the balls of my feet and seeing the house all lit up and thinking one word, Mama, and just running as fast as I could back to that house. I can still remember to this day, that's what I remember the most about it, is running back to the house and being afraid. So then after that, our neighbors were teenagers, and they were on a date, and they were sitting in the porch swing, and they were just out there hanging out talking, and the girl's parents lived right here next door. And they had 2 or 3 sons and 1 daughter, and the parents, they were a real nice family, real conservative, nice and stuff. And the girl and the guy apparently saw something come up out of the woods. So they went in and told her mom, and her mom called my mom. And their parents were probably a good 15, maybe 20 years older than my parents. They were like a generation older. And their mom said, well, what should I do? My mom said, she kind of at that point, I think, started putting everything together and said, call the police.
By this time, it was dusk when they sighted it, and by the time we were there and started our investigation, it was basically too dark to go any farther, and like I said, it was pretty rough terrain. So we contacted our chief and told him what happened, and he called this guy that had been a Carbondale police officer and had been their canine officer. And he since had left the Carbondale Police Department and was basically a private individual. I think he worked as a security guard. So, and he brought this trained German Shepherd down to the area and picked up the trail. And they followed the trail down to this barn. The dog went up to the door of the barn and cowed down and wouldn't go in.
About that.
And this was at a trained search dog that had been used by the Carbondale Police Department at one time. And the handler was pissed. And he grabbed the dog, pushed it in the barn, and the dog came back out howling.
Huh.
And so we went in and shined our lights around the best we could. And we couldn't see anything, but we had kind of a musty smell, like an old barn that hadn't been used, so I couldn't say it was a smell of a monster or anything, but it didn't smell real good in there. And to backtrack a little bit, I had been off the night before, but when I came in for duty that night, I was briefed as to what was going on, and we were afraid that somebody was going to get hurt if it was a hoax, because around here, you know, there's a lot of guns and things.
Yeah.
Somebody with a lower level in intelligence, I guess would be the best way to put it, may not have thought twice about taking a shot at this thing if they saw it.
Perhaps the most widely known sighting of the Big Muddy Monster took place in Riverside Park. On June 25th, 1973, what some refer to as the Lover's Lane incident occurred in the boat ramp parking lot area. Many point to this sighting as definitive proof of the monster, while others believe it to be an obvious hoax. Whichever the case, it would become the match that lit the fuse to the biggest explosion of muddy monster sightings to hit the area in decades.
So I'm here at Riverside Park, and this is where the story really exploded. It was back on June 25th of 1973, just before midnight, when a couple lovebirds pulled into the parking lot. They were just getting settled in when all of a sudden they heard a growl or a shriek that they couldn't identify. Really scared them. That's when they noticed an odd smell in the air. And as they were trying to figure out what was going on, some giant 8-foot Bigfoot looking creature, white furred, caked with mud from its bottom half, seemingly coming out of the river toward their car. They were so terrified they shot off to the police station. Police sent 2 officers out to respond. When the officers got here, they could smell an odd smell in the area too. They also discovered giant footprints in the mud. The river had been flooded out recently, and they saw much bigger than a human footprint. They went out to get boots to go investigate into the woods, and while they came back, they were joined by the original witness and an officer, a deputy with the sheriff's department.
Well, they called me, because I also did all our photography. They called me to come down here to take some photographs of the footprints. And the river had been up over this.
Oh, really?
Gone back down. I mean, it was a muddy mess. And they took me back into the woods where there were some footprints. You couldn't tell much about them because the mud was so soft it was caving in.
Oh, sure.
And you could just tell it was big. So I photographed it. And it was Officer Jimmy Nash was the lead officer on that. And I believe it's Deputy Scott. They told me what had happened. A couple parked up here at night. And we believed them because they wasn't supposed to be together.
Oh.
They were both married, but to different people.
Oh, yeah.
And so we knew for them to be scared enough to come up and report it, they saw something. So Jimmy took me back into the woods, and you could see the footprints. They were huge, but they were all falling in you, but you couldn't tell any details on them. And I photographed them, and that's about it.
And when I spoke with him, he told me that you could see something big was leaving indentations. Even though it didn't look like a human foot, he was convinced something big was out here. He was also convinced that it wasn't someone in a suit playing around. He said at that time, it was gun country. Everybody was carrying a weapon. Nobody would be foolish enough to come out in a costume and risk getting shot. So they could hear the creature, but they didn't see it. There was no scat, no hair, nothing left behind except the footprints. About 3 a.m., they concluded the investigation, thinking that was the end of the story. Little did they know it was just the beginning.
As the saying goes, there's always two sides to every story. Well-known paranormal researcher Bruce Klein of the Little Egypt Ghost Society threw one of the biggest wrenches into the big muddy waters when he claimed to know a credible acquaintance who just may have hoaxed the legend to life.
So we're here along the shores of the Big Muddy River at Riverside Park. Bruce, you grew up here, so I was wondering if you had any particular stories you could tell us or some of your background with this legend?
Actually, I grew up in Harrisburg, about 40 miles east of here, and it was in the mid-70s. I was in high school there, 70 to 74, and around that time there's a lot of sightings of a creature around here called the Big Muddy Monster and the Momo Monster, and it's quite a big flat back then, so it got a lot of people excited. I remember we'd get up groups of people, we'd go out, we were on the edge of the Shawnee National Forest there in Harrisburg, go out through the forest looking for this big muddy monster creature. And a lot of the guys had their shotguns and they were going to shoot whatever they found and looked around, never found anything, but it was a big flat back then. A lot of people looked for it.
So back then people took it very seriously. They
very
believed
serious.
It was a real thing that was happening, not just tall tales.
Exactly. There was sightings all the time reported and people out actively looking for it all the time.
And from the 70s on, were there still accounts? Were people still talking about it? Mid-80s?
Well, maybe into the early 80s, and it kind of tapered off after that.
Yeah. As a researcher, have you talked to people who believe they've encountered it or spotted it?
I've talked to some people, especially one in particular, that claims he was responsible for it.
Yeah, you have the story of this acquaintance of yours. Tell that.
Okay, this acquaintance, I'll call him Willie because he doesn't want his real identity known. I worked with him locally for several years, and Willie, he was an amateur filmmaker, very big into special effects. He'd make his own costumes, and he'd go around to like the movie fest where they had actual movie artifacts and costumes, and he'd learned part of the trade from the actual filmmakers. And he was big into science fiction. He had quite an imagination. So it was I believe it was 1973, Willie got together with a couple of his associates and thought it'd be pretty fun to make up this creature costume of this big hairy river monster.
Mm-hmm.
So they got this costume. It was furry, hairy, about 7 foot tall, and they caked the fur with some river mud from here. And they went to their garage workshop and brewed up this special stink juice called Oldie Sasquatch. It was just horrible. I mean, horrible smell. And they made recordings of these creature sounds like grunts and growls and screeches. And their theory was they were going to come out here some night and set it up right in this general area by the boat dock. Because at the time this was popular, especially on the weekends with teenagers, they come out here parking, and they were going to scare the bejesus out of these people. So they put on that costume. They had the recording of the creature sounds. They had their stink juice and little aerosol sprayers, and they waited over there like in the tree line. And pretty soon, a couple pulls up here in a car. It was right up in here, and they waited a little bit, make sure they got involved in the car a little bit. Okay, now is our time. So they started spraying this stink juice around, and there's a slight breeze that just drifted right into the car. About then, they came out of the tree line. One of the guys had this big creature costume, caked in mud, fur all over it, and the stink juice was coming across, and they hit the recording of this, all those sounds and came out like that. And people saw it, scared the tar out of them. They started up the cars, on their wheels, went right downtown to the police station and reported it.
What do you think of the idea of people saying that it was someone hoaxing it or several people hoaxing it? Because everyone we've spoken to, from officers that were there that night to just general people that live in the region, say this is gun country.
Right.
Nobody's going to be running around in a costume afraid to get shot. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it definitely is, rural America here, and people are inclined to use their weapons when confronted by something frightening. But I don't know. As to a possible hoax, a hoax is possible. Certainly, somebody could have made some sort of outfit, some sort of costume to fool people. But the problem is, when you get into the descriptions of the creature itself, it's 8 feet tall, 350 pounds. That's a feat in itself to find somebody to fit inside of that suit. And also the number of sightings and the locations were so divergent at times that it was unlikely that it was one or just a small group of people pulling off all of them. So the contention is, at least amongst cryptozoologists, is that there's enough evidence to suggest that there was some sort of cryptid here. There's really no evidence to speak of other than some anecdotal accounts of, rumors of people having been involved in a hoax, but nothing really has been substantiated, to a satisfying degree. So, the monster does remain, a monster. It remains an anomalous creature that has not been explained.
Perhaps the most credible evidence of Big Money comes from an average family whose matriarch had a typical momentary road crossing encounter during the peak of the 70s sightings. Jessica Van Pelt possesses a family heirloom that is ambiguous and inconclusive, yet very intriguing, and it could be the last surviving physical evidence from the alleged creature.
So during the sightings of the mid-70s, Jessica, your family had a unique encounter with the Big Muddy Monster. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
My grandmother worked midnights at the hospital, and she worked in the ER, and then she was on her way home from the hospital, and between Gorham and Route 3, she saw something go across the road, and it startled her enough that she come home very physically shooken by it. And she then proceeded to tell my grandpa and my dad. So my dad, and I don't know who all went with him, but at least my dad, and they went out to see if they could find anything. And they did find a footprint. And so at that time, my dad was a Boy Scout troop leader. And so he had taken the Boy Scouts then back out, I think it was probably the following day, and they made a cast of the impression, of the footprint.
Sure.
And so then I've had it in my possession all this time since the 70s, and over time it's just, nobody even asked about it for the longest time. It was just part of our family history.
But you valued it enough to hold on to it after all these years.
Oh yes, it was. My dad, he was a big outdoorsman. It was part of our family story, that we knew how important it was to him, so yeah.
Sure, and so this is the impression so they took the cast that they made, and then they pushed it into some plaster and made this impression that we have here.
We actually had the actual cast for many years, and it sat in a basement, and just over the years it deteriorated. But
yeah, they can be very fragile.
I used to take it to school for show and tell. That was like a big thing. We were going to have show and tell. Let's take the footprint, So
what was your family's basic belief on whether? Did they believe this creature was real? Did they think someone was hoaxing? What was their thoughts on this?
My grandma was a very strict Catholic woman, and she never, I could say beyond a shadow of a doubt, my grandma never told a lie. And she just didn't make stuff up. So if she said she saw it, she saw it. And that's exactly the whole family's belief is, yeah, she saw it. And for them to know how she came home and how it affected her, yeah, there was no doubt.
Was she more, would you say, more excited or more fearful?
No, I think she was scared.
Okay.
Yeah, originally she was scared. Now, I mean, she drove that same road every day to go to work, so
it was something.
It wasn't like she
wasn't a normal occurrence.
No, and it wasn't something that kept her off the road.
Sure.
No, she just thought, well, maybe I'll see it again, and as grandkids and now great grandkids, when we drive down certain areas of Route 3 and of Gorham, we always think maybe we'll see it too.
So your family was very familiar with local wildlife.
Oh, yes.
So if they saw something
Yes.
that was out of the ordinary, they would know.
Yes.
And not mistake it for something
Oh,
else.
no. And that's exactly. Grandma, I mean, she drove the back roads. It's a very rural area. Other than trailer trucks and farm equipment, that's what you have on the roads. People going to and from work, that's it. And then you have deer, coons, skunks, stuff like that. No, she knew what she saw.
Biologist Tony Gerard may be the most level-headed Bigfoot researcher and enthusiast in all of southern Illinois. Gerard is actually a huge skeptic of the paranormal and cryptids, but is open-minded to the fact that a phenomenon does exist and is willing to investigate reports in order to reach his own conclusions.
So Tony, as a biology teacher and living here your whole life, what kind of creatures live in this area that you're aware of that could be anything like what people are seeing as Bigfoot? Is there anything that would be even remotely similar?
Now, absolutely not. Historically, we had a lot of black bear here. I expect to see black bear back in this area in my lifetime. They've expanded from Arkansas into Missouri, and occasionally we get one wandering across the river into here. But nowadays, nothing like that.
So we've both heard some of the recordings that people have got in the Shawnee National Forest that are kind of interesting. So if not Bigfoot, what do you think that these calls are that people are saying are Bigfoot?
Well, in my opinion, the vast majority of things that people must think are a Bigfoot are one of two things. There's some kind of canid, usually coyotes or young coyotes or dogs, or they're a barred owl. Because a young barred owl, boy, they can let out a screech that'll just raise your hair, but it's an owl. And I think an awful lot of people that aren't deeply familiar with that kind of stuff often mistake it for something wild.
Stan Courtney is a well-respected Bigfoot researcher who has spent countless hours trying to obtain audio evidence of primate activity in southern Illinois. He willingly shares his recordings and maintains a free database on his website. These are some of the samples he has obtained over the years.
So, of course, there's the famous Bigfoot video that everyone's familiar with. And people have been picking that one apart for decades, saying it's a man in a suit. But so far, it's pointing that it might not be.
Nothing I ever shot when I was involved with that sort of thing, nothing that we tried to recreate ever looked that good. Now, having said that, that's what, 40, 50 years old at this point?
Yeah.
Everybody has a video camera better than the camera they used at that point in their pocket, and nobody's got anything better in the meantime, there again, I don't know what to do with that, you know?
So in your opinion, based on the size of this area, could it even support a creature the size of Bigfoot?
Yeah, absolutely. Could we have a big omnivorous mammal around here? Sure. We had, back in the 1800s, a really large black bear population in this area. So yeah, there's plenty of habitat. There's plenty of food resources and things like that. Now, to me, do I think that after 400 gun-toting years of U.S. history that we just happen to overlook a giant ape or some undescribed hominid? No, I don't. But I've talked to enough sincere people that I believe there is an actual phenomenon. What it is, I don't know.
Folklore is a way for a culture to pass along moral lessons and helpful information to help guide the less experienced through life. Area author and historian John Musgrave believes there is a logical explanation to the Big Muddy stories that's rooted more in the traditional realm than the physical.
We always want to believe that there's more out there, that, we haven't solved everything, we haven't found all the answers. And the idea that, is there Bigfoot? Does Bigfoot exist any place? Does he exist here in Southern Illinois? Probably not. But we have stories of bears. Long after bears were supposed to be around. Are they the story, the background? Is it just a prank? I have come across Bigfoot pranks and hoax stories dating back to at least the 1930s, where kids would basically make snowshoes to make footprints in the snow and trick their neighbors, even during the Depression. We've seen it at different time periods, and I've heard people tell me, it's like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's husband, and that was doing here in Murphysboro. And I think as individuals, we're drawn to the stories kind of beyond the edge, the ones that we don't think are true, but they sometimes, when you look into them, they actually are true. Are they really close to being true? Just like I think some of the stories about ghosts are a way to preserve the story of a crime that took place, I think monster stories, in many ways, is either a morality tale or it's a safety lesson. You tell kids there's a troll underneath the bridge because you want them to stay away from the edge of the bridge. There's a monster in the pond, don't go, and that keeps little kids from going next to the pond when there's not adult supervision.
Founder Zach Stark and team member Ben Bishop of the Southern Illinois Monster Hunters have a different point of view than skeptics when it comes to the existence of the Southern Illinois Sasquatch, and they were more than willing to share personal experiences. Their familiarity with vocalizations, strange happenings, and tales of up-close encounters paint quite a picture of the possibility of a giant ape in the woods.
What really got me into it is whenever I had my first encounter, whenever I was 9 years old in Randolph County, Illinois. We just come home from a baseball game in St. Louis, and we're in the garage, and we hear this big howl outside, and it scared me to death at 9 years old. You would understand. Being a little kid, you don't know what's going on. And it wouldn't be until 10 years later, whenever I found the Ohio moaning call that Matt Moneymaker and the BFRO recorded back in '94. And that was darn near accurate of what I actually heard that night. Well, growing up, I was an outdoorsman. I hunt and I fish with my grandfather out here on our property. I know quite a bit about what the wildlife consists of here in Southern Illinois, especially in Randolph County. I mean, we've got deer, coyotes, we've got raccoons, bobcats, mountain lions, and I go and I try to study up on their habits, what kind of vocalizations they make, and it was just something that I couldn't put my finger on. And trust me, I tried to go and rule it out what it was. But it just didn't pan out to where I could actually put my finger on what it was until 10 years later, and I found that recording. And I'm like, holy crap, this is what I heard. In my opinion, the Bigfoot in southern Illinois, whenever it comes to being passive and aggressive, it's a mix of both. I have had encounters where they have been observant and watched me from afar, you know, and then I've had encounters where I have actually been run out of the woods. I've been ran out of the woods a couple years ago at night by a big alpha male that just pushed down a whole tree and took off running after me charging. Well, I took off running. And do I feel like I was going to die that night if I didn't get out? Yeah, I do believe so. I believe, you know, I had overstepped my boundaries and walked into their territory. I was getting too close to something that they was protective over, whether it be young or whether it be, as I call, the harem, which is all of their females put together where the alpha male breeds with the females. It could have been one or two of those things, or it could have been too close to its ground zero, its home. You know, it just depends on what you do, really. Like the old saying, don't poke the bear.
You know, it's got to be this big ape. I mean, for thousands of years, you know, things evolve. And we've evolved over time. I mean, this thing's roamed the woods and seen civilization just boom and just get pushed farther and farther back. And just, you know, he's grown into himself just like we all have. I mean, he's, you know, they say he's over 7 foot tall and huge stride. I mean, he's got to be a giant ape that's just continued to grow. I've had a couple people now that I've like kind of told a couple stories to. They've kind of came out of the woodwork and was like, oh yeah, you know, about 7-8 years ago, you know, I was out in the woods and heard something and didn't really know what it was, just, you know, written off as like, oh, a bobcat or something like that. And a guy that's actually from West Frankfort, where I'm from, he told me that he had seen one out in the tree line behind his house, which is a place I actually ride four-wheelers at. So, you know, that's always nice to know that it's, you know, right there up close and personal with you at all times. I think Bigfoot could find shelter in just about anywhere. In southern Illinois, we've got so many cave systems, I mean, woods, to old abandoned houses and pole barns. I mean, just even broken down pole barns that are bent over and crushed. I mean, you could easily just, you know, scoot stuff around and just live in that.
Perhaps the most controversial explanations regarding Bigfoot involve it being an interdimensional creature, one that travels to a parallel reality of our own. This could pertain to a spirit, an alien, or something that can step through a portal, a window area, or what is referred to as a vortex area. Shaman Coyote Chris Sutton believes in the spirit and mystical realms, and his explanation of the energy surrounding forest are just as feasible as any when it comes to the mystery of the Big Muddy Monster.
We're staying here right now in what's an old growth area of the woods, and there is energy in these areas that are more energetic than other parts. Like if you live in a subdivision or something like that, it's not going to be as energetic as this because you've got these old trees, you've got all these wonderful brush and things like that, and spirits are attracted to that. Elementals are attracted to that energy. They live here. In the very place we're at right now, there are small elemental beings, which some would call fairies. But yeah, I mean, that's because I've had experiences with them out here. But these places, like, they exist all over the place. You know, and so what happens is that entities are attracted to this, and this is where they will live, but they also sometimes interact with humans. You have instances in North America, all over North America, of people interacting with elemental beings. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, for an example, is known to be very elusive. In the Northwest, there are 60 different names for Sasquatch because there's so many tribes, but they all seem as very elusive, rarely seen, and not necessarily bad, but seeing him a lot is sometimes very concerning because it ties into legends about the changing of the worlds. So It's not always a great thing to see that. Now, in most cases, and there's like always a dichotomy here. Some traditions have them as being very nice, mild, don't bother people. Others, they go as far as to stealing their stuff and taking their children. So, I mean, these legends all vary, but they all take on a mystical quality, because we're talking about, you know, Sasquatch, Bigfoot is a flesh and blood entity, whereas they see it more times as mystical. They can get in and out of places and just disappear.
This area seems to be like a hotbed of just odd things in general, like strange phenomena. It's kind of clustered around southern Illinois that locals call Little Egypt. Do you think that this is what author John Keel would call a window area? Do you think that this part of Illinois could fit that category as just one of those weird zones where just strange things happen in general, whether it's UFOs or ghosts or monsters in the woods?
Well, certainly. I traveled, extensively, throughout the Midwest looking for places like that where there's, conglomeration of anomalous activity. Whether it's cryptids, anomalous lights in the skies, places where people see spook lights or, purported haunted locations. I try to go to where those are centralized, and this area certainly does have a preponderance of phenomena.
Yeah, the vortex area is like Sedona, supposedly has all these vortexes, but you find them anywhere. At Cahokia Mounds, was a Native American settlement back in the 13 to 1400s, huge, 20,000 people they think, but in the Native culture, anytime something gets that big, they tend, at least in North America, they tend to disperse. It doesn't work because they don't have enough materials to keep that many people, enough food, enough wood. But if you go there are vortexes there. And the places we're talking about are not cities. These squatches that come around, not big cities. They're in more rural areas. So that it's, they're not gonna go into the big cities, but these little cities or little towns and with areas like this with all these woods and all this energy, they're gonna be more attracted to that.
So some people believe that southern Illinois, with what they call Little Egypt, is kind of a window area because so much strange stuff happens between hauntings, spook lights, UFO sightings, Bigfoot. Do you think that there's something unique about this region that sets it apart? Whether it's a window area or some people call them vortexes or vortices?
No, I don't, actually. In fact, I think if any place you go, if you want it to be a vortex window area, you can dig up enough stuff if it's had a long enough human habitation. There's going to be stories and things like that. Where I used to work in northeastern New Mexico, it was also a vortex area. I just don't think there's any more of that here than there is anyplace else, personally.
Although the vortex theory and Bigfoot traveling interdimensionally seem far-fetched, what is fact is there have been many reports of strange activity in southern Illinois over the past 100 years. But it could also be said that one cannot solve one mystery with another, and trying to do so only leads to deeper rabbit holes. And finally, we come to what is perhaps the most bizarre reported encounter with the Big Muddy Monster. In 1988, what was first thought to be a prowler in a local salvage yard turned into a night of terror for those involved, and one that led to a second big cryptid flap in Murphysboro. The salvage yard event became known internationally as researchers as far away as Russia inquired about the sighting. Armed security, glowing red eyes, an 8-foot-tall, white, aggressive Bigfoot. This encounter has it all, and it's a night that Bob Raymond says he will never forget.
Bob, I'm really excited to talk to you because your story is one of the most bizarre and terrifying encounters I've ever heard of. So take us back, 1988. Where did it happen? Describe the area that we're dealing with.
Well, I got a phone call about 1:30 in the morning. Usually, at the time, I did towing for the county and Murphysboro police, and I figured it was, a call to pick up a car, either, that needed to be taken off the roadway. But instead, it was my security guard, Charlie Straub, and he told me that he really believed there was somebody out in the salvage yard, and he thought they could have been out there stealing, parts from some of the cars or trucks. And I told him, I said, well, don't do anything. I'll be there and I'll back you up. So I drove over there, and we both had flashlights, and we walked straight down the center of the salvage yard, which you had cars on this side and vehicles on this side, and had a center road that went right down the middle. And we walked it all the way to the end, and as we got closer to the end, we could smell this odor in the air. I mean, it was raunchy, really bad. And I asked him, I said, that's not a skunk. I said, I don't know what it is. It's almost a rotten smell. And he thought maybe it could have been a dead animal or something like that. So we walked a little further, and then we heard some rustling in the brush. Along my salvage yard, there's a fence line, and then there's trees and woods. And so we tried to see if it was a deer or something like that, and as we brought our flashlights around, this creature was standing right next to the fence. And I mean, he looked between 8 and 10 feet tall, somewhere in there, and very broad across the shoulders. I bet 3.5 foot, 3 foot across his shoulders. And he had bright red looking eyes. And he let out a scream. It started low, and then it raised almost like a siren, just real high. And you could feel whenever he screamed, it would just hit you. The power in his scream. And Charlie said, you think I ought to shoot it? He was scared. He already had his pistol pulled, and he was the police chief in a small town just a little right in the area there, Murphysboro. And I told him, I said, no, I wouldn't shoot it. I said, that thing would probably, you'd make it mad and then really hurt us. So we just took off at a fast trot back up to where the shop area was, and we went inside, and then another guy that was there, he worked the radios and stuff for when we got tow calls and stuff, and he asked me, he said, what's going on down there? I heard a weird sound, and I said, there's a creature down there, and I said, this thing is not happy. We disturbed it. And so I called my wife and told her what happened, and she laughed at me and started poking fun at me and told me I was just tired and I was seeing things. And they showed up, and my wife and my mother and my sister, and they were teasing us and that, but they could tell that me and my security guard was pretty upset. And it seemed like no sooner than they got there, we heard something just right outside the metal building. My building was totally steel metal. And I said, there's something out there, and I said, I hear it moving around the building. And about that time, we heard a bang. I mean, it hit the back of the building. And you could actually see the indent where it hit on the inside because there wasn't an inner wall on the building. It was just plain tin. And they all got scared and started, freaking out, wanting to know. Immediately they wanted to leave. I said, I wouldn't step outside. I would not go outside at all. I said, we go outside and this thing it might mean us harm. And so we kind of hung around there, and it'd bang a couple times and make some almost like grunting sounds. And he did that for, I guess, 15, 20 minutes. Maybe he hung around, and then he kind of wandered off, moved away, and we felt it safe to go out, so we went out. My mom, she got kind of nosy, and she was wanting to see what it was, and I kept telling her, don't, let's get out of here. I told everybody, I said, we all need to get out of here and maybe to move on. And so that's basically what we did. My mom claimed she saw it moving around the cars down in the yard, but I don't doubt that she saw it. I mean, it was big enough, it towered above him, cars, trucks.
And back to when you and Charlie encountered it, was there any color to it? Could you see besides the bright red eyes?
Almost like a silvery white tint, or kind of a silver looking hair. And it was real long. It was probably a good 6 inches in length. And he had kind of a high, I call it like a dome head. And his face was kind of leathery looking. And almost human looking. But I think the thing that stayed with me for the rest of my life was them eyes. The way when that light hit his eyes, and they were just glowing.
There were multiple eyewitnesses that corroborated the salvage yard account, and footprint evidence was discovered, but nothing beyond that. After a brief flurry of activity, the Big Muddy Monster retreated once again into the murky waters of folklore, rising only on occasion to frighten residents and monster hunters. The vast swamps, deep canyons, and high bluffs await curious seekers, and perhaps may one day reveal the true nature of Illinois' most famous river monster, and the people of Murphysboro welcome any who seek adventure along the banks of the Big Muddy River.
I would just say that we welcome people to come, and I have an open door here. I've met with many people over the years about the Muddy Monster, and I'd welcome them to kind of stay for a day and see what it's all about and decide for themselves. We're a welcoming community. We're happy to talk about it. There was just a new mural painted downtown that features the Big Muddy Monster as a part of it. And so there are several things to see here to get a full grasp of what the legend is all about.
I think when we started researching this case, we had no idea that it would have the span of sightings, or how puzzling and complex and just how bizarre it would turn out to be.
I totally agree. Everyone knows about the sightings that were in the mid-70s, but we found clearly that it goes way beyond the 70s, both in history and forward in time up until present day.
After all the research I've done, I feel like the Big Muddy Monster is this idea that magic or dreams or stuff still out there, that childhood mystery and intrigue, that's still there, the adventure of going out and exploring it.
I think part of it's the landscape too. I mean, you have the Shawnee National Forest, that's 300,000 acres of swamps and woods. I mean, when you're walking through that, you just have that feeling that anything could be out there.
And since we don't have a body that would provide conclusive evidence, part of me enjoys the idea that 100 years from now, people are still going to be camping, keeping an eye out, listening that the big muddy monster doesn't come up on them. I really hope that these legends will continue on forever, that it only gets weirder and stranger, and maybe we'll find out what it is, we'll prove it or disprove it, but for me, the adventure, the travel, the people we met, the witnesses we spoke with, it's not a bad second prize.
Definitely.